Marilyn Monroe was one of the best actresses of the 20th century, and I think we must know about her life history, so here's the second episode of his biopic. Enjoy it. After her major successes in 1953, Marilyn began to develop a reputation as being demanding and difficult to work with. Though the public was unaware of it, she relied on several drugs to get her through the day, medicating against insomnia, depression, and other concealed problems. She also dated several men in and around Hollywood, though by 1952 she was in a relationship with Joe DiMaggio. In addition to her major film successes in 1953, Marilyn appeared on television, with her first appearance on The Jack Benny Show. In January 1954, 20th Century Fox studio head Darryl F. Zanuck suspended her contract following her refusal to perform in another film which exploited her success in the typecast role of the dumb but sexy blonde. Monroe had refused the role in the film The Girl in Pink Tights. In response, Monroe fled to San Francisco, where she married Joe DiMaggio on January 14, 1954. Both her suspension and marriage were front-page news. After their marriage, DiMaggio and Monroe traveled to Japan to meet commitments previously made to train and evaluate Japanese baseball teams and players. Marilyn took the opportunity to remind Zanuck and other studio executives of her immense popularity. She embarked on a tour to entertain American troops in Japan and Korea. By the time she returned to the United States, she was among the most popular entertainers in the world. That spring, Photoplay magazine named her its most popular female star. Marilyn leveraged her popularity to receive a more favorable contract with Zanuck and Fox, which included a $100,000, about $1.03 million today, bonus and more control over her film roles. In many ways it was revenge for Zanuck forcing her to appear in dumb blonde roles, as well as his despicable use of the casting couch. In exchange, she agreed to appear in the film There's No Business Like Show Business, a role she despised, but Zanuck demanded she do for having refused to appear in The Girl in Pink Tights. She also received a role in The 7-Year Itch, which led to one of the most iconic images of her career. By mid-1954, the marriage of Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe was in trouble. DiMaggio resented the constant press coverage and the demands of her career on his wife, and was deemed by Marilyn's friends in the industry to be controlling and possibly abusive. While filming The 7-Year Itch in September, Monroe used the famous scene where the subway trains blow up her skirt as a publicity event. Among the fans and photographers who were present for the scene's filming was a seething DiMaggio. It was the last straw, though it was Marilyn who filed for divorce the following month, after just 9 months of marriage to the former Yankees superstar. Their relationship remained cordial, though Marilyn dated several other men, among them New York playwright Arthur Miller. With Miller's encouragement and support, Marilyn teamed with Milton Green, a photographer, and formed a production company named Marilyn Monroe Productions, MMP. The new company put her into a legal conflict with 20th Century Fox, which began in early 1955 and increased the pressures on the star. From the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe relied on several different medications to cope with the pressures of her career, her relationships, and her fragile mental condition. Following the collapse of her marriage to DiMaggio, her use of prescription drugs increased. She began studying acting under Lee Strasberg and his wife, Paula Strasberg. Strasberg demanded Monroe enter psychoanalysis. Strasberg believed psychoanalysis would help Marilyn confront her personal demons, and the experience could then be used to improve her performances as an actor. Instead, Marilyn grew increasingly unwell, both emotionally and physically. The legal battle with Fox added to her troubles. By the end of 1955, MMP and Fox arrived at an agreement which led to a new contract for Marilyn. In October of that year, her divorce from DiMaggio was finalized, and Marilyn's relationship with Arthur Miller grew deeper. Miller had been listed as a communist by the FBI, which then opened a file on Marilyn, which eventually grew to hundreds of entries and continued to the end of her life in 1962. As 1956 began, Marilyn Monroe's new contract with Fox was announced. The press touted it as a major victory for Monroe. The press, which had been for the most part derisive of her year-long battle with the studio, now called her a shrewd business operator, Time magazine, and a champion of the individual over the corporation. Meanwhile, the far-right press began to question her loyalties based on her increasingly public relationship with Arthur Miller, a known communist sympathizer. Columnist Walter Winchell called her a darling of the left-wing intelligentsia, the latter descriptive a conservative code name for communists. Through her position as head of MMP, Marilyn had greater creative control of her films, including the choice of director. She also had control over script changes and rewrites, and her demanding persona on-site led to difficulties with film crews and fellow actors. She was also chronically late to the set, causing delays in filming which exasperated studio executives, and her drug use often left her incapable of remembering her lines while performing. Nonetheless, critics began to regard her as a serious, dramatic actor, beginning with the film Bus Stop, 1956, and continuing through the rest of the decade. In June 1956, Marilyn married for the third time to playwright Arthur Miller. Miller was Jewish, and Marilyn studied under a rabbi prior to the marriage, converting to Judaism in July. Their marriage, like her previous two, was troubled from the start. Marilyn went to England to film The Prince and the Showgirl with Laurence Olivier, and problems between the two stars made for an uncomfortable and difficult filming. Olivier demanded Marilyn play the role similarly to the way Vivien Leigh had done in the stage version. According to some biographers, Monroe suffered a miscarriage during the production of The Prince and the Showgirl. Her dependence on drugs increased, and when the film was completed, Marilyn took a year and a half away from films. During the period of recovery, she and Miller resided in New York, with time off in Connecticut and Long Island. Her health continued to deteriorate. Diagnosed with endometriosis, a disease of the reproductive system, she suffered another miscarriage as well as an ectopic pregnancy. Her illness exacerbated her mental state, and her drug use spiraled out of control. In 1957, Marilyn suffered an overdose of barbiturates which required hospitalization and rest for over a month. Despite her remaining away from Hollywood and filming, her marriage to Miller was strained. Her mental condition continued to deteriorate, her reliance on drugs and psychiatric care increased. In 1958, she returned to acting. During the production of Some Like It Hot, with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, she often arrived late to the set, too drugged to remember her lines. She demanded multiple retakes of her scenes, antagonizing her fellow actors and director Billy Wilder. Curtis claimed he had an affair with Monroe during the filming. Despite the difficulties, Some Like It Hot proved a major success with the public and critics, and remains in many lists as one of the greatest American films ever made. Marilyn followed it with Let's Make Love in 1959. During filming of Let's Make Love, Marilyn had an affair with Eve Montant, with whom she appeared in the film. The affair was not a discreet one. Widely reported in the press and denied by neither participant, it helped bring about the end of her third marriage. In 1960, Marilyn began filming The Misfits, with Clark Gable and Montgomery Clift. Written by her husband, Arthur Miller, the filming was troubled. Problems on the set were largely caused by the dissolution of her marriage to Miller, her demanding rewrites of numerous scenes, and Gable's own ill health. It was to be his last film. Clark Gable died just days after the film was completed in November 1960. Although nobody knew it at the time, it was also the last film Marilyn Monroe completed during her lifetime. Following its completion, Monroe went to Mexico to obtain a quick divorce from Miller, abandoned her Judaism studies and practice, and entered a period of steadily declining health, both mental and physical. She underwent surgery for her endometriosis and other related problems and spent hospitalized for mental health issues. She began work on other projects, but health problems prevented their completion and they were abandoned. During 1962, Marilyn's health problems led to delays in several projects, including a film in which she was to star with Dean Martin, Something's Got to Give. Monroe's health problems included sinusitis, which prevented her working, though the studio publicly claimed she was faking her illness. In May 1962, she appeared at a birthday gala and fundraiser for President John F. Kennedy, at which she sang Happy Birthday to JFK in a famously sultry, sexy manner, wearing a skin-tight dress which made her appear nude under the television lights. Following that appearance, Marilyn filmed a scene for Something's Got to Give in which she swam naked in a pool, generating considerable publicity. By then the film was so far behind schedule that Fox fired Marilyn, replacing her with Lee Remick. Dean Martin refused to continue the production without Marilyn, and Fox sued both stars for compensation. Monroe eventually settled with Fox and planned another film to be shot later that summer. She also sat for interviews with Life magazine and Cosmopolitan that summer in an attempt to counteract the negative publicity which had accompanied her firing. Something's Got to Give was scheduled to resume shooting late in 1962. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom in Brentwood, California. Her body was discovered by her psychiatrist, who arrived at the home after being called by Monroe's housekeeper. Her autopsy revealed she had died on the evening of August 4 from an overdose of barbiturates. After testimony from several doctors who had treated her over the years, Marilyn's death was classed as a probable suicide. She had a history of overdoses, both accidental and likely deliberate, as well as a history of violent mood swings and suicidal thoughts, according to her doctors. At the time of her death, the public knew little of her history with depression and drugs. The studio's publicity machine had largely kept such issues private. The sudden nature of her death, and her relatively young age, 36, led to what became the legend of Marilyn Monroe. An industry arose over the star, one in which she was either an exploited, abused victim of the studio system and the rich and powerful, or a sex and drug-addled exploiter of powerful men. Marilyn was no longer a movie star, she was a legend which continues to grow 60 years after her death.